More than 60 years ago, a pregnant civil rights activist was beaten by police in broad daylight. The nation was watching. The federal government took notice. And yet, no one was ever held accountable. This is the story of Marion King and why her case still matters today. More than 6 decades after a brutal police assault in southwest Georgia, newly released federal records are reopening scrutiny of one of the most disturbing and unresolved cases of law enforcement violence from the Jim Crow era. The records were released by the Civil Rights Cold Case Review Board and focus on the 1962 assault of Marion King, a civil rights organizer, and the wife of Slater King, a prominent leader in the Albany movement. Despite national outrage at the time and concern from both the White House and the U.S. Department of Justice, no police officer was ever prosecuted, disciplined, or held civilly responsible. What happened to Marion King was known then, but what these records reveal is why justice never came. In the summer of 1962, Marion King was 5.5 months pregnant. She traveled to the Camilla jail with her young son Jonathan to deliver food and supplies to jailed civil rights demonstrators. What should have been a routine act of care turned into a moment of violence that would follow her family for generations. According to witness testimony and medical records now made public, local law enforcement officers attacked Marion King outside the jail. She was kicked and stomped while lying on the ground, unconscious and unable to defend herself. Hospital interviews conducted shortly afterward recorded her calm but harrowing account of the assault. Months later, Marion King lost her unborn child. Her family has always believed the injuries she suffered that day played a direct role in that loss. "My mother was pregnant. They knew that," her son Jonathan King later said. "They kept kicking her anyway." The beating quickly became a symbol of the brutality faced by civil rights activists, especially Black women, during the movement. National civil rights leaders condemned the attack. A young John Lewis referenced Marion King's assault as an example of unchecked police violence when speaking at the 1963 March on Washington. Even inside the federal government, alarms were raised. The newly released DOJ files show that federal officials acknowledged the seriousness of the assault and recognized that Marion King's constitutional rights were likely violated. The case reached the highest levels of federal attention at the time. But that's where the trail went cold. Despite the outrage, federal prosecutors ultimately declined to pursue charges. The records cite evidentiary challenges, jurisdictional barriers, and the legal standards of the era, standards that made it challenging to prosecute police officers for civil rights violations in the early 1960s. At the time, federal law required prosecutors to prove that officers acted with specific intent to violate constitutional rights. That burden of proof was so high that it effectively shielded law enforcement officers from accountability, even in cases involving clear abuse. Legal scholars say Marion King's case was not an exception. It was part of a pattern. This wasn't just brutality, one civil rights historian explained. It was racialized and gendered violence, and the law, as it existed then, offered her virtually no protection. Black women, in particular, faced a system that neither saw them as victims nor provided meaningful legal remedies when their rights were violated. Marion King's case exposed the gap between moral outrage and legal accountability. For her family, the newly released records bring clarity, but not closure. "It doesn't bring justice," Jonathan King said, "but it tells us what happened, why it happened, and why the system failed her." The Civil Rights Cold Case Review Board emphasized that while criminal prosecutions are no longer possible, releasing these records serves a vital public purpose. It documents abuses that were once ignored, ensures they are not erased from history, and forces institutions to reckon with their own failures. And this story is not just about the past. The renewed attention on Marion King's case comes at a time when the United States is still grappling with police accountability, qualified immunity, and the legal thresholds required to prosecute law enforcement misconduct. Legal experts note that many of the same structural issues that blocked justice in 1962, deference to police testimony, and institutional resistance to accountability and narrow interpretations of civil rights laws, continue to shape outcomes today. Marion King's story is not just history, one civil rights attorney said. It's a legal warning. You know, it reminds us that progress is not automatic. Those laws really do matter. Marion King never saw justice in her lifetime. But by telling her story now, we make sure that what happened to her is neither forgotten nor dismissed, and that the failures of the past are fully confronted in the present. Thank you for watching and for taking the time to learn about Marion King's story. If this video mattered to you, please like, share, and subscribe to help keep these histories alive and these conversations going. Your support really does help ensure stories like this are never buried again. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one.